Welcome back, friends. It's a new week and we got all the results from the tournaments from the previous week. In this video, we're going to go over the tournament results for the previous week. We're going to take a look at the overall meta and the current state of the data slate. And we're going to do a faction focus, a deep dive on Aeldari and their new Codex and the Imperial Agents. So sit back, relax, and let's get right to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you found this video helpful or informative, please give it a like. It really helps spread it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe so you can get all my latest videos. It really helps support me and support the channel. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on. The first thing we're going to take a quick look at is the player numbers for the previous week and for the data slate. So last week was a bit of a light week. We only had 400 players and just over 5,000 for the current data slate. Games played last week were just under 2,000 with 1,900, and the data slate were just over 26,000. And last week we just had 10 tournaments and 86 for the data slate so far. All right, and the first thing we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so that anything that's in the green is in that acceptable win rate, and anything above or below is either orange or red, depending on how far up or down it goes. Team Cults at the top there had a really good week at 67%. Imperial Agents was next up with 60. Adeptus Custodes with 59. Orcs with 56. And then Death Guard, Death Watch, and Chaos Demons all with 56 as well. Down at the bottom, we have Black Templars with 20%. Sisters of Battle with 36. Drukhari with 40. World Eaters with 41. And Chaos Knights with 43, rounding out the bottom 5. Overall, some new unexpected people kind of sitting at the top. Agents, 60%, really good to see. They only had a few players, but those players still did pretty good. And Genius Cults was 67%. They had a decent representation, which we'll get into the next slide, and that's actually pretty impressive that they managed to get to 67% because it wasn't just one or two people. Orcs had a really good showing, and so did Custodes. Custodes have been doing deceptively well consistently. They might not be like dominating in tournament wins, but they're just consistently doing pretty well week over week. They're in a pretty good spot right now. Other things to quickly note here, Asher Militarum is only at 52% after their Codex release. Aeldari, 50%. Now those are sort of probably growing pains until people sort of figure out the optimal list to run. So we should maybe see them level out to what we would expect them to be after a couple weeks of data. And down at the bottom, World Eaters, Drukhari, Knights all did pretty poorly, and that's kind of consistent with what's been going on. Sisters been same old story every week. I feel bad for keep saying it, but 36%, and Black Templars just had 20%. They just had a really poor showing last week. Okay, and now we're going to move to army representation. So this is the percentage of the player base playing each army. So the average, if everything was equal, would be 3.7% for each army. And we see at the top there, Space Marines has 9.8% of the player base. So that's almost 3 times the average. So, you know, that's an extremely large amount of people playing Space Marines. That's one of the higher numbers we've seen in a while. And then Aeldari popping up there, 6.6%, number 2. People are obviously really excited for the new Codex and had a ton of players out this week. Down at the bottom, Black Templars at lowest. They actually lower than Agents, which is pretty surprising. Black Templar players are kind of down on it right now. There's really not much bringing them into the army. Hopefully we can get some changes here soon to sort of breathe some life into them. But then we have Agents at next with 0.8%, Death Watch at 1.3%, Sisters at 1.3%, and then tied for number 5 is Mechanicus, Drukhari, and Space Wolves all at 1.5%. Orcs had a good bounce back week. They were down like 2% last week in rep, and they're back up to 6.6%. This is a little higher than what they normally live at, but still pretty high and not too surprising for Orcs. Tyranids, 6.1%, Custodes, 6.1%, and Space Marines at 5.8%, so around out the top 5. And overall, it's kind of continuing trend over the course of this data slate is it's skewing very high towards the top. There's like 5 or 6 armies who are bringing most of the players, and then there's 5 or 6 armies who have almost no players. So while the win rates are even, the so representation is wildly skewed in one direction. So it kind of tells you that certain armies are having a little bit more success winning tournaments and sort of doing well in tournaments versus just sort of going 50-50. All right, and now we're going to move on to this chart here that shows armies win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation all put together in one bar. The bigger the number, generally speak, means the higher the average of all those 3 stats are, and I have it ordered from the largest at the top to the smallest at the bottom. So taking a look as an example, Genestealer Cults had a 67% win rate and a 43% XOX1 percentage, and an army rep of 1.8%. So it's about half of the average, but still a decent enough player count that it's pretty surprising to see that high of an XOX1 percentage and win percentage. So the Genestealer players last week did pretty well for themselves. Next up, kind of in the next little grouping there in the top 5, we have Custodes, Deathwatch, Aeldari, and Agents. So they kind of get there in different ways. Adeptus Custodes there, 59% but win rate and only 33% XOX1 and a 6% representation. But then you have Deathwatch, a little bit lower win percentage, but a higher XOX1. And then Aeldari, 50% win rate, so it's actually like 10% less than Custodes, but their XOX1 is almost 40%, so they're making up some ground there. So then everything kind of just slowly chunks down to where you sort of get to the bottom where we see the 5 armies that are kind of struggling. Black Templars, I mean, there's not much to show there. They had 20% win rate, 0% XOX1, and 0.5% representation. Sisters, 36, 0, and 1.3. Drukhari, 40, 0, 1.5. And then the last two for rounding out the bottom 5, Knights at 43, 0, 2.8, and Votan 44, 0, and 2.5. So we had 5 armies last week who didn't get a single tournament result of 1 loss or no losses. So definitely feel for those armies. Their players struggled mightily during the week. Anything to note here in the middle, Thousand Suns, 55% win rate, but only a 14% XOX1, which is actually fairly close to the average. So they did pretty well for themselves there. And everything else is kind of average. Nothing really jumps out, but it's a good way to see which armies are succeeding in more categories, and you can kind of see where each army is doing good and where each army is doing poorly. All right, and moving on, we have the tournament wins for each army for the previous week. So last week, at the top here, we had Asher Militarum with 2 and Custodes with 2, so Custodes got a couple wins, which is nice to see. And then we had Space Marines, Space Wolves, Imperial Agents with their first win of the Dataslate. I mean, with such a low player representation, it's hard pressed for them to get some tournament wins, but they managed to pull one out this week, so it's really good to see. Death Guard, Chaos Demons, and Aeldari. Aeldari actually did get a win, and it was with the Aspect Host detachment from the previous weekend. So the new Codex already pulled in a win for them, and that's good to see. So overall, shift from the norm. Usually Space Marines were at the highest. Asher Militarum's always usually up near the top as well, but it's good to see Custodes get a couple wins. And really good to see Agents and Aeldari sort of get some wins and get them on the board there, especially Aeldari with the new Codex. You want to keep that momentum going with the hype from the new Codex. All right, and I'm going to add a different slide this week, and this is the tournament wins for each sub-faction. So we looked at the armies, now we're going to look at the sub-faction. At the top here, we have the Bridgehead Strike, so that is the Guard. Both wins came with that one detachment. The Imperialis Fleet got the win for the Agents, and the Aspect Host, like I mentioned before, got the win for Aeldari. So then you have Legion of Excess for Demons, which is not surprising, and Custodes split theirs between Shield Host and Solar Spearhead. Okay, and we're going to move on to win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So this is 8 weeks worth of data, and this shows all the armies' win percentages through that time. So at the top, Deathwatch, 55%, and then we got Necrons at 53, Demons at 53, Imperial Agents sitting at 52, so they're the 4th highest, and Adeptus Custodes at 51. Down at the bottom, Templars just over 40%. They're dangerously close to dipping below 40%, which is really bad. Chaos Knights, 43.5. Sisters, 43.8. Mechanicus, 44. They're all below the acceptable win rate for GW. Other than that, everyone is within that range. So everything is looking pretty good. Now, compared to the representation and compared to the tournament wins, everything's sort of skewed a little bit more that way. But generally speaking, besides like the couple at the bottom, everyone's doing fairly well. Most people are having moderate success with every army, which is good to see. All right, next we're going to look at the army representation for the current data slate. So sitting at the top here, we have Space Marines at 8.1, Necrons at 6.6, and then tied for third, we have Guard and Adeptus Custodes at 5.8, and then rounding out the top 5 is Tyrannids at 5.5. Down at the bottom, Imperial Agents at 0.3% representation, which is, just where they sort of live. There's just a very low represented army, But, even with that low representation, they still managed to get their win this week, which is great to see. Deathwatch at 1.3, another army that's lowly represented due to just it being one detachment, but the players who play them finding a lot of success. They have the highest win percentage and a couple big wins this year, including LVO. And then we have Sisters of Battle, Drukhari, and Space Wolves rounding out the bottom 5, all at 1.6 and 1.7%. So overall, Space Marines are still dominating by a long shot at 8.1%. And you're kind of seeing a big skew, again, kind of like the weekly representation, where most of the armies, the top 10 are carrying the load for most of the representation, and the bottom 6 or 7 are hardly seeing any representation. But a couple things to note. Death Guard is actually up pretty high there. They're at 5%. They're up the same as Demons and Blood Angels and Chaos Space Marines. They're not really doing poorly. They're not doing great, but they have a strong fan base and a strong player base, and they're showing up every week, which is good to see. And even down there at the bottom, like Lisa Votan and Gene Stealer Cults, they're normally a little bit lower representation, but they're still at 2.8%, which is pretty high considering how they've been doing recently. I mean, Gene Stealer Cults had a good week this week, but they haven't been doing all that well for the past 8 weeks. So overall, it's not exactly as balanced as you'd like to see, but it's not terrible. You'd like to just peel a little bit back, but you're always going to have, this chart's always going to be a little more skewed. Armies like Space Marines, Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, Guard, they're always going to be at the top because they're just fan favorites. And you're always going to have stuff like Drukhari and Sisters and Deathwatch and Imperial Agents all at the bottom just because they're a little more niche and a little more difficult to play and paint. So this one is never going to be perfectly balanced, but you'd like to see a little bit more balance than it is. And the next chart we're going to look at is the Army Tournament wins, and this is broken down week by week. So the total number for each army is listed at the top, and then each color represents a different week. So we can see Space Marines there last week, they won 1, and then Demons also won 1. So Space Marines have 12 wins for the Dataslate, so they are still 50% more than the next army. With Chaos Demons at 8, and then you got Necrons and Guard at 7, Orcs at 6, and Chaos Space Marines at 5. Then you got a whole bunch in the middle there, and you're still 4 without a win. So you still have Sisters, Votan, Black Templars, and Mechanicus all without wins so far. Not surprising for Black Templars and Sisters, given their win rates and their representation. Mechanicus is kind of the same, just low on all categories. Votans have had their weeks up and down, but overall they're just kind of in a meh spot, so not surprising as well. It is nice to see Agents get a win on there, and it's nice to see Aeldari kind of get a win, and Custodies got a couple wins this week. You can see their charts, so they're jumping up a little bit into that higher category, so we can see if they can build up that momentum and sort of build up closer to the top. You'd like to see this chart definitely broken down a little bit more evenly among the armies. You don't want such a disparity of the top versus the bottom. Then that kind of just shows while the win rate might be balanced, the power of the army and the ability to win tournaments and have those things that take it to the top and take it to the finish are kind of lacking in certain armies, and you're definitely pulling sort of top players away, and they're going to move towards those armies that have that ability, like Space Marines, like Guard, like Orcs, Demons, those type of armies right now. So you'd like to see this a little bit more balanced, but overall it's not terrible, but it is what it is. First faction focus for the week is Aeldari. So they just had a new Codex release, so the sample size is very small for all the data, but we just a quick look and see how everybody's doing. So week over week, you can see their army rep sort of was going down a little bit, and then it jumped up really high this week, almost over 4.5% up from last week, and the win percentage is up at 9% from last week. So overall, the Codex is getting good first impression, I would say. And if you take a look at the most played detachments, Battle Host is obviously number 1 because they spent most of the time with their index detachment. But if you look at the win percentage, you can see Seer Council down there is 75%. They only had 2 players, but both those players did extremely well and brought it up to 75%. And the Aspect Host, who won the tournament, they had 62% win rate. So overall, you can kind of get a quick look at the bottom of which new detachments are seeing early success. So right now, you get Seer Council Aspect Host and a Warhost. They're kind of the ones doing all the work right now. It'll take a few weeks for this to sort of balance out and for people to find their footing. The first week is never the best indication, but I thought it'd be fun to take a quick look. And then you look at the ranks out of all 27 armies. They're just perfectly mid, and that, ties in with their meta health rating of 101. Everything is almost perfectly balanced. Their win rates within 1%, their army reps within 0.3%, their XOs within 0.5%, and their tournament wins is almost average. So right now, Aeldari is almost as perfectly average as you can ask for over the last 8 weeks. So we'll see if the new Codex sort of skews that data a little bit, but right now, perfectly average. Okay, moving on, Imperial Agents. So this is a little bit different. They're a little bit all over the place. So you can see their rep is anywhere down from 0.1 to they had no people on February 3rd that week. They had 0 representation. They had 0.8% last week, so they did actually get some people out last week, and they had a 60% win rate, and they did manage to get their first win. A thing to notice is they've only had Imperialis Fleet. No other detachments have shown up. They haven't even brought their Grotmas detachment once, which is kind of surprising. And then if you look at the ranks, they're kind of up and down all over the place. Players last, win percentage 4th, XOX 1% first, tournament wins 1 near the bottom. So they're very small player base, but the players who do play them know what they're doing by the looks of it and know how to win with them, and they're actually seeing some success. So I don't think it's ever going to be an army that sort of catches mainstream just due to the hobbying side of it and the complexity of it. It's a very skilled army to play, and I think if you know how to do it, you can have success with it, but I don't think it's for everybody. Okay, guys, that's it for the week. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps support me, support the channel, and we'll make sure that you get all the latest videos when they're posted. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you next week.